Hello and welcome to Pilot2ATC. This is going to be a quick start tutorial where we're going to cover primarily the screen layout and config. So this should probably be the first one that you would watch. This is the main screen here, and across the top is what I'm going to call the information panel. So once you are flying or have a flight plan filed, then you'll see things like the name of the next waypoint, the distance to it, the desired track to get you there, and your estimated time en route, as well as the distance and time to your destination, and the distance and time to your top of descent, where you're going to want to start your descent into the arrival airport. Also shows your true airspeed and ground speed. Place here you can set the altimeter. If you set it in the cockpit, then it'll show up here, or you can set it here and it'll change it in the aircraft. And then here you can set the transponder mode, off, standby, or active. And here, of course, the transponder code. In order for these to work, you have to be connected to the sim, which we're not going to do today. Down here we have the COM and nav area where you can see and set your frequencies for both COM and nav. We also have the minimize, maximize button. When you press this, the screen will, this middle area will disappear and the screen will go to whatever location and size you had it set for the last time you pressed the button. So if I change it, let's say like this, go back to maximum and then hit minimum again, it goes back to that. So a trap here is if you have your main window maximized and you press this button to minimize it, then it's going to stay maximized and this will be blank and you'll think something went wrong. Just remember that you really need to set this size, and then you can flip back and forth between the two views. This is helpful if you only have a single screen and you want Pilot2ATC to be visible at the bottom for most of the flight and just need to pop it up to look at the map or the flight planning area. Okay, over here is the, I'll call it the main connect area. Once you're connected, it'll show you the call sign that Pilot2ATC is going to use with you. This button here obviously connects you to the sim. The on top button, when you press it, will keep the Pilot2ATC window above other windows on the same screen. The area over here to the right we'll talk about in a future video, but that's what we'll call the speech area. It has the say it feature over here, the speech text window where your speech will show up in writing, as well as this speech from ATC and the Copilot. Here in the middle of the main area, you've got the map and these buttons over here on the right that pertain to the map. We'll cover that in a future video. And then here we've got the main flight plan area, and we'll cover that in a future video as well. So in this video, we want to concentrate on the config panel. We'll click this button down at the bottom here, config, and it'll pop up this configuration panel, which has multiple tabs. So you can see there's a lot of different options that you can set. So we'll just go through these from left to right. On this main setup panel, up here at the top, this ignore battery and avionics switches. You would only use that in certain aircraft. If you're having trouble with the radios and it seems like they're not turning on even though you've got them turned on, if you press this button, then that will ignore the settings in the aircraft in terms of the battery or avionics switches being on or off. Some third-party aircraft don't implement these features the same as the stock aircraft, so clicking this might fix a problem. Same thing with this reverse COM channels. Normally you would not check that one, but if you notice that when Pilot2ATC says COM1, your cockpit says COM2, then you click that one and it will reverse those. One that's very common to keep checked is to calculate safe en route altitudes. That will have Pilot2ATC check altitudes to make sure that they're at least above terrain level. If you're in a part of the world or flying in a part of the world where they use the term decimal instead of point when giving frequencies, so 121.3 instead of 121.3, then you can click this one. This one I like to use, show ATC assignments. When you do that, it will show the assigned frequency down here at the bottom. Also, if you're flying an IFR flight plan and have a star assigned, it will show the star and the approach. So it's just a way to have that information easily displayed. The stay centered when zooming map, but basically if you don't have that checked, the map will center wherever the mouse is. So here I'll put the mouse over here on the tip of Florida, and when I move the mouse wheel and try and zoom in, all of a sudden the tip of Florida becomes centered. If on the other hand I have stay centered when zooming checked, then no matter where my mouse is here, the map will stay centered wherever I had it centered when I do the zooming. So that's really just whatever you prefer. And then finally, show inline grammar help. Normally you'd want to have this checked. That will determine whether or not you can use say it. Without that checked, say it's not going to work. And your help phrases will not show up down here in the speech to text window in gold if you do not have that checked. So I always have that checked. The next area here is your call sign. If you're going to be flying an airline, then you want to have this airline call sign box checked. You want to put the name of the airline or the call sign name. For example, I think British Airways is Speedbird instead of British Airways, but in this case it's American Airlines, so American, and then the flight number 343 or 2353, whatever those numbers are. Typically an airline call sign or flight number is not going to have a letter associated with it. You can put letters in here if you like, but typically just do whatever the real airline might do. If you are flying a heavy like a 777, then you can check the heavy box, and then Pilot2ATC will know to include heavy at the end of the call sign. Once you've got this set up the way you want it, make sure you press save, because without pressing save it won't change anything. Now if you're going to be general aviation, then you unclick the airline call sign box, and then here instead of putting an airline number you put the manufacturer. So let's say you're Cessna 172, you put Cessna in here. Okay, and then you would put your tail number. So in the US, tail numbers start with N's and might have both numbers and letters in it. So maybe it's November 341 Victor Bravo. And then you hit save, and now your call sign would be Cessna 1 Victor Bravo or November 341 Victor Bravo. Several different ways that Pilot2ATC might address you. Okay, then finally down here at the bottom, there's this COM radio swap tone. So when you swap frequencies over here with the COM radio, if you have this play tone checked, then whatever tone you've selected here, and these are all the Windows tones, I've got the background wave tone, which is kind of like a cling sound. Okay, and that's the tone then that I'm going to hear when my radio frequencies have been changed successfully, either by me pressing the COM1 button to swap over here on the left, or the co-pilot switching it. So that way I'm sure that the frequencies got changed. If I don't have this checked, then there will be no audible indication. Okay, and that's down here at the bottom. There's some information with your license key and hardware ID, etc. So if we're troubleshooting and I ask you in an email to send me this information, you can just do a screenshot of this and send it to me. Okay, the next tab is ATC settings. So this has to do with setting up ATC. There's a lot of the settings here have to do with altitudes and minimum vertical speeds and radius, etc. So
all these different settings. Look in the user's guide. There's a good description there, and it'd probably take 10 minutes to go through them on the video. So we're going to skip the individual settings.
Finally, down here, in a lot of parts of the world, the VFR squawk code, instead of being 1200 as it is in the US and Canada, it's 1700. So if that's the case for your area, then change this code to 1700. Units type, you've got US, metric, and feet, which is common in Europe, and then pure metric, which I suspect there might be some places that do that, but I'm not sure there are anymore. Metric and feet, you would be getting your altimeter. That would be like 1013 instead of 2992. And but your altitudes would be in feet, and flight levels thousands of feet. Okay. This one here, you can have Pilot2ATC provide ATIS based on what it sees the weather as being. And if you check this box, then when you tune to ATIS, Pilot2ATC will give you the weather. You'll want to turn off the ATIS and ATC in the sim in that case. And then destination only taxi readbacks. One of the difficulties a lot of users have is their taxi readbacks with the route, etc. So if you check this box, then as long as you get the runway correct, it's going to let your readback pass. And then finally, this edit controller frequencies. We're not going to actually go into it, but when you press this button, you will get a little box pop up, which unfortunately is not movable, so you can't see the whole thing here. But it lets you add and delete and edit ATC controllers. We'll have that covered in a separate video in the future. Sounds, we're not going to go into this. We'll have a separate video on this, but this is what lets you set up your background chatter. Voices, here you can set up your voices for all the different possible controllers. You can actually leave all of these blank, especially if you only have a couple of default voices. You can leave these blank, and Pilot2ATC will choose either a male or female voice based on whatever your available voices are. In this case, I've got quite a few third-party voices, and for each controller, you can select which voice you want to use, and then once you have the voice, you can set the speed. 0 is default speed, but you can increase it if the voice is slow, and a lot of them are. You can increase it, and then once you have it where you think you might want it, you can also set the volume. Press test.
This is Sarah Voice Adam, English, East Coast, America. I will be your ground controller for the flight.
That's a nice speed. If I had it set on 0.
This is Sarah Voice Adam, English, East Coast, America. I will be your ground controller for the flight.
That to me sounds like he's pretty much sound asleep on the job, so I'll set him to 2. So you can go through and set all of these up and then not have to worry about it anymore. This bottom test button is only after you're connected and dialed to a valid frequency. You can press that button, and that controller will give you a similar test phrase. You can make sure that the frequency has a good voice set. That's pretty much only used when you're troubleshooting. Okay, the speech tab. I would suggest that you just leave these all set to 0, which is for the defaults. If we're troubleshooting, you're being understood by the speech engine, then you might want to make some changes here, but I suggest you just leave this area alone. The output device, this lets you choose from speakers or your headset. Typically you want the headphone or primary sound driver, if you have that set, it will go to your default listening device as set up in Windows. Okay? In my case, I've got headphones set. And then Copilot options, I highly recommend that both these boxes be checked on your first few flights, even if you plan on doing all the speaking yourself eventually by letting the Copilot respond to the radio. At first, you'll get a feel for the right phrases and the appropriate times to respond and that sort of thing. And then you can always come back in and uncheck them at some other point. AI traffic settings. This is for traffic warnings from the ATC controllers. This is how long to wait after a traffic's been called and you've said that you do not have the traffic in sight or no joy. In my case, I have it set to 60 seconds. Or if it gets more than 3 miles closer to you than it was when it was first called. Sighted traffic, so if I get traffic and I see it and it's still a factor 180 seconds later, then it might get called again. Now I've got it set to where traffic is not going to be called unless it's within 5 nautical miles of my aircraft. You can make that bigger if you want to get more calls or you want to get them sooner. And it has to be within 2,000 feet of my altitude. So I don't like a lot of traffic calls, but if you want more, you can make that 4,000 or 5,000 and you'll get traffic that's not really a factor. Flight plan, this is a very important screen. Typically, if you're going to be flying IFR, you'll probably want all 3 of these ATC assigned boxes checked. However, if you're trying to set up a short flight plan without a star, then you might want to uncheck this, because if you have it checked, even if it's a short flight plan, it'll put in an arrival if one is available to that airport. Force pilot runway selection is important. Typically, I fly with this checked. That way, when I'm setting up my flight plan, I put in a SID or departure. Then Pilot2ATC will give me that runway as my departure runway. Or if I'm flying VFR, I can verbally request that runway. And with this checked, Pilot2ATC will give me that runway. Otherwise, I'll get whatever runway Pilot2ATC picks based on weather and some other factors. I also like to have this auto load recommended procedures checked. That way, once I'm assigned, or I file my, actually it's when I file my flight plan, then if ATC is going to assign SID, stars, and approaches, then it will load those into the flight plan for me automatically. As you get more advanced, you may want to uncheck this, and that way it will be a little bit more realistic, and you'll have to listen to ATC and hear what they're assigning you, and then change your flight plan accordingly. Randomized SIDs and stars. If you're flying the same route a lot, then rather than picking I'll say the best SID or star that Pilot2ATC tries to do, it will kind of randomly pick SIDs and stars from those airports. And so that'll give you a little bit more variety in your flights. Okay, ATC ignores published speed limits and below 10,000 foot speed limit. If you have these checked, then you won't get speed limit calls from ATC. Export options for flight plans. If you are flying a plane that does not allow you to input approaches and stars, etc., into the GPS, then you can check this box and it'll export the individual waypoints, and so the plane can actually fly the SID, stars, and approaches based on the waypoints that are in the flight plan. If you're going to set up the SID, stars, and approaches by name in the GPS or FMC, then uncheck this box and you'll get the flight plan with only the departure and arrival airport and the route in between the procedures. you can have Pilot2ATC automatically export the cleared flight plan. So once you get clearance, when you get clearance for the flight plan, it will save the flight plan in the proper format depending upon what sim you're flying to FSX, P3D, or X-Plane, and it'll save it to these folders. So make sure you have these folders set up correctly. And in the case of P3D and FSX, if you have SimConnect installed, it can actually load the flight plan into the sim for you. In the case of X-Plane, you'll have to go into the sim and load it using the GPS or the FMC, but at least it'll be sitting there in the proper folder for you. This vector leg distance is fairly important. This is if you're getting radar vectors, how long the legs of the vectors will be. If you're flying an airliner or a fast business jet, you'll want at least 4 nautical miles. You might want 5 or 6, depending upon the characteristics of the aircraft and your ability as a pilot. If you're flying a Cessna 172, you want to lower this down to 1.5 or 2, because flying 4 nautical miles at 90 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour takes a long, long time. If you have procedures stored in PDF format, they can be shown, and this will be covered in a future video, but they can be shown in this terps panel. So you can set that folder here, and the terps, when you go to open saved procedure, then it'll go to this folder first. And then again, this is your primary flight plan folder. So when you go to open or save, load or save a flight plan, it'll look in this folder first. Weather. Normally I set mine to this NOAA real weather, or if I'm flying FSX or P3D and I don't have one of these weather engines, I'll just set it to the sim weather. So if you select sim weather, then you need to put in the X-Plane root folder down here, because that's where it stores its METAR file. If you're flying P3D or FSX, Pilot2ATC will use SimConnect to get the weather from those sims. Or if you're using any of these weather engines, then you need to put their folders where these files are located here, and P2A will look there. Finally, setting up buttons like your joystick button. When you first come in, this might be blank. So when you hit set, it'll bring up a joystick set window like this, and you'll be able to select your joystick, in this case SciTech Pro Cessna Yoke, and then press whatever button you want, and that will change this here. You might have to click in that box in order to make it work, and then you press set, and it'll show up over here. If you decide you don't want to have a PTT joystick button for some reason, you can click enable, or I should say uncheck enable, and that will clear this, or press the clear button. It'll do the same thing. Okay, so I obviously do want to have one, so I'm going to set mine. This is what it might look like when you first bring it up. And of course, the button I use, it happens to be 0. So I set that, and it shows up over here. You can also set up a hotkey on the keyboard, and it's very similar kind of a setup. I'm not going to set one up, but basically when this comes up, you just press the hotkey that you want, and it will come in here and show you what it is, and then you press set, and it will be set. Speech recognized tone. A lot of people hear this and they go crazy thinking there's something wrong. But this is a tone that will play when your speech is recognized. So if you say something and you don't hear this tone, then you know that your speech was not even recognized. So the one I use is called speech disambiguation. Hard to say, but it makes this sound. So it's a nice little short clink. If you have something like there's another one that might work well. But you probably don't want something that's that complicated, and some of these are even worse. So anyway, you can go through here and pick whatever you like, and then you'll hear it. Now if you don't want to hear a tone at all, then you can just uncheck this button here, and then you won't hear the tone when your speech is recognized. Okay, if you want to use a joystick button or a hotkey in order to say a phrase using say it, so if you say it a lot, that might be a good idea to set these up. They're set up the same way that the PTT button and hotkey are set up. And then this minimize button that we talked about at the beginning of the video, you can actually set up a joystick button to do that action. And that might be useful if you're, again, using the minimize button a lot. Every time you press it, it'll either minimize or maximize, and you won't have to be moving the mouse over here to click on it. Okay, same thing with the hotkey here. Okay, so that's it. That's the config. There's a lot to cover there, but hopefully that will help you figure out what all these options do. And appreciate you watching the video. Enjoy your flights.